Hey guys, it's Prince Rich with Rich Technology Group. Today's video is titled, Does Satellite Internet Work with a Voice over IP Phone System? Again, this video is called, Does Satellite Internet Work with a VoIP Phone System? Or better put, will a VoIP or Voice over IP phone system hosted, specifically a hosted Voice over IP phone system solution, work well with satellite internet? So we're going to hop right into this. I'm going to give you guys some pointers in regards to satellite internet and what the carriers recommend, and then we'll go into pros and cons and some things you need to look out for and go from there, and making sure you get the best quality of service out of your voice over IP phone system with satellite internet service. So first of all, as you guys already know, people contact me all the time looking for internet service options all across the United States. For those of you who may or may not know, I represent all business internet service providers in the United States. So I work with the fiber carriers, the broadband internet carriers, the satellite carriers, the list goes on, the DSL guys, the list goes on and on and on. So that being said, the question is, for someone who is watching this that may be in a rural area, or maybe the only thing that you can get that has the bandwidth that you need is satellite or some sort of wireless broadband internet, the question is will it work with voice over IP? In short, yes and no. But before we get into the pros and the cons, I want to talk about a little bit of differences between certain satellite internet service providers. So first of all, you have a couple of different types of satellite internet services for business. You have what's called point-to-point, and then you have what's called like broadband wireless. To explain a little bit about point-to-point and the difference between broadband wireless, point-to-point or actual true satellite is something like a Directway, a Viasat, or a HughesNet, where you have an actual satellite dish in your yard, typically sitting, or in your yard or at your office premise, typically sitting on the ground, that actually points up at a satellite in space. The broadband wireless, which is what I actually have in one of our office locations, is where you have an actual satellite dish of sorts on the roof of your building so that it has a little bit of altitude and can see over the horizon, i.e. hills or the tree line. And it is not connecting to a satellite in space. It is connecting to an antenna similar to like a cell phone tower that is in the distance, typically less than about 20 miles or about 10 kilometers or so away from your actual location. Now, what is the difference between the two? First of all, both of them are asynchronous, which plays a factor in the connection. Before we go any further, synchronous connection means that it can pass data back and forth simultaneously, so input and output. Asynchronous, which is what most all satellite service providers is it sends data and then it receives data, sends data, receives data. So there is a little bit of delay in signal because it can't send and receive data simultaneously like a broadband connection or like a fiber connection, or as I like to call it, like landline-based internet that is buried in the ground or has an actual wire that is connecting you to the 2 points, your office and the internet service provider. So understand that there inherently with satellite is going to be some delays, which can have a negative impact on voice over IP phone service. So anyways, back to what these are. So point-to-point, as I already mentioned, would basically connect to the satellite. Some carriers that use point-to-point, for example, are Viasat, as well as HughesNet, and maybe like something like a Directway or something like that. A broadband wireless is a bit different. It's something like a Sierra Wireless or something like that. It is quite literally broadband internet at an antenna that is just away from you because you're kind of off the beaten path or in the boondocks, as I like to call it, but you're so far away that you can't afford to pay for construction costs to get broadband at your office or home office location, but the service provider is the service provider is not willing to extend service to that area because there just isn't enough people in the area to justify the cost of it. But there is a cell tower of sorts or an antenna that is owned and operated by the carrier that has the ability within, typically less than 20 miles of your location to beam wirelessly actual broadband that is at that location. So that's the rough differences there between the two. Let's see here. Both services, as I already mentioned, use a dish. Typically with point-to-point, the dish is literally on the ground and pointed at the sky to hit a satellite in space. And with broadband wireless, which is what I have at the location I'm at currently, which is pretty reliable, and we use VoIP on it, I have a dish on my roof that is sitting on like an 8-foot pole that's braced so that it can see over the tree line down the mountain and actually see an antenna that I can actually see if I were to stand on my roof that looks like a cell tower. So that means there's actual broadband at the cell tower or antenna as you want to call it, but just not at my location. So it's being beamed to me wirelessly. Now, which works better, satellite or point-to-point? First of all, before we even go into satellite or point-to-point, which works better, I just want to be clear. If you can get a broadband connection or something that is physically in the ground, like what I like to call a cable connection, like broadband, fiber, DSL, I recommend you get that over satellite because it is a constant synchronous signal. With satellite, you are out in the open, so you're open to the elements such as rain, wind, storm, things like that. Even lightning has effect on satellite internet. So inherently, satellite internet is always going to be less stable and have a little bit more latency, which will impact your voice over IP than your typical in-ground or landline-based internet services. But again, for the purposes of this video, we're talking about satellite because I'm assuming those who are watching this, it's all you can get. Kind of like myself at this particular location where we have broadband wireless being beamed from a satellite to a dish to a antenna about 20 miles away. So anywho, satellite is a little bit more risky because as I mentioned, you've got a little bit of latency in there. It differs by carrier, but we'll get into that description later in this video. I typically don't recommend with the satellite internet connection, if you're looking at voice over IP, more than 1 to 5 voice over IP phones. You can do more than 5, but when you do more than 5, you are really depending on the quality of the carrier that you've got and the amount of bandwidth that you're paying for or that you're even able to get. You are really pushing the card when you start going over about 5 extensions or 5 voice over IP connections or more, because you're adding more load on your network, which your latency becomes a much bigger factor at that point. Let's see here. As far as point to point, I would say about the same, 5 to 10 phones realistically. Some satellite providers that we work with, but there are many more, would be HughesNet, Viasat. Satellite providers that we work with tend to be HughesNet and Viasat, which unfortunately at the time of this video, while they may tell you differently, I really don't recommend you use them with voice over IP. You may be able to get by with one phone, but even then it's still very iffy on what the call quality and service is, because even though these guys deliver a decent amount of bandwidth, they typically have a really high latency. Now, when we look at the point-to-point wireless providers, those would be carriers such as, but not limited to, which we represent, BroadSky and Sierra Wireless. Now, with point-to-point, the connection tends to be much more stable. The thing is with some of your satellite providers, you will get high bandwidth, but really high latency. So you might get like 50 megabytes down package, but you might have 100 or as high as 200 ping, which is really bad, 200 millisecond ping. You could have a gigabyte of internet, but if your ping is really high, it's almost the same as having no internet. So just to reiterate, you've got satellite providers, and then you've got point-to-point wireless providers, which provide things like broadband wireless, which is what I have currently. The problem that you run into with the satellite providers is you can get high bandwidth, but you get really high latency, which means buffering and streaming, data packet loss, which results in bad voice over IP quality, such as static, call breakup, and potentially even things like dropped calls, failed transfer, and the even bigger problem, such an inconsistent signal that you can't even keep your phone, your voice over IP phone won't even stay registered to the carrier, and that's a bad thing. With point-to-point wireless providers, if you get a good one, such as BroadSky or Sierra Wireless, which we represent, you won't typically get as much bandwidth. You'll typically get maybe like 15 megs down or 10 megs down on average, but your latency will be significantly better. At the time of this video, I'm currently using a carrier where I'm only getting about 15 megabytes down, and I'm getting approximately 2.5 to 3.5 megabytes upload speed, but my latency is really, really good. My ping is usually somewhere between about 45 milliseconds, and at the very highest, in storms and things like that, about 80 milliseconds. For me, it's perfect. I've got 3 voice over IP phones in my office. I can be on them all at the same time between me and my wife and whoever else is using them, and use them for business and do conference calls and handle the normal course of business without anybody saying, hey, you sound like crap, or the calls dropping or anything like that. I've got what you would consider a high quality point-to-point wireless provider that is beaming the signal from the dish on my roof to a broadband source that is less than 20 miles from my house. So that, like a Broad Sky or Sierra Wireless, I recommend. Some pointers that I want to talk about really quick in regards to satellite wireless and just considering it as a potential solution for your voice over IP phone system. Number 1, satellite service, as I mentioned, in comparison to point-to-point or broadband wireless service, I do not really recommend for voice over IP at all. But if you're absolutely going to go with satellite and use voice over IP, i.e. HughesNet, Viasat, and a few others that are out there, I really recommend you don't go over 1 to 2 phones. I also recommend that you get some kind of stipulation with your provider if you're getting new service with them, and ask them if they can give you a 90-day trial or something, because the last thing you want to do is be stuck in a contract with the internet provider and with the voice over IP provider, and you've got internet that is causing big problems for your voice over IP, and it's the only thing you can get in your area. Let's see. Another pointer that I wanted to throw out there is whether you're looking at satellite-based internet, i.e. Viasat or HughesNet, or whether you're looking at point-to-point broadband wireless, like a Sierra Wireless or a Broad Sky, you really need to understand that those are going to cost you more than what you would normally be paying for like a regular broadband or something like that, regular landline internet like broadband or DSL. They're typically going to cost you a lot more. For example, whereas an equivalent broadband connection, say through Comcast or Spectrum Business, might only cost you about $70 a month before taxes, for the equivalent satellite or point-to-point broadband wireless internet, you're going to be looking at probably spending closer to around $200 to as high as maybe even $250 to $275 a month, and the prices can go up. This is why I wanted to do this video specifically for business, because if you're like me, home office or legitimate office, you can justify a couple $100s or more per month if it's the only thing that you can get in your area. So I highly recommend, before you settle on any wireless solution, satellite, point-to-point broadband wireless, you contact somebody like me so that we can exhaust every potential option in your area, because satellite or point-to-point, any type of wireless internet in general, really needs to be a last resort. If there's nothing else in your area, then it's fine. But that's why you have somebody like me to help you figure out, okay, what broadband providers really are in your area and really can guarantee their service, and can we vet and get them to essentially put their money where their mouth is and prove that you'll get the quality of service needed, because that's what you need to ensure voice over IP quality of service. Let's see here. Another pointer I want to throw out there is, if you're using a wireless or if you're using a satellite or broadband wireless service provider, it is really important that you have a really, really good router in place in your office. Why? Because you're fighting two things. You've got a very limited internet connection, and you've also got an internet connection that by nature, it's not the service provider's fault. It's just the nature of the beast. It's in the architecture of the wireless solution. You're going to have a higher latency, or ping as we call it, than what you would usually have with a regular landline-based internet. Why is a good router so important? It is because a good router has specific filtering in it and things where you can maximize the most out of your internet connection, and also control the latency, as well as tell the router to tell the voice over IP phones in your office to give them higher priority over other things in your household or your home office or your business, such as people that may be streaming on the internet, cell phones that may be connected to wireless, downloading of emails or whatever on multiple computers. In a decent router, and I'm not talking about an expensive router, just in a decent mid-grade router that has the right functionality and features and capability and control over your network, you can tell the router to give your voice over IP phones the highest priority over everything else on the network. This means that little bit of internet connection that you do have, your phones get priority, and you can control the quality of service and ensure quality of service when you're talking to clients and contacts and things like that. Another pointer I want to throw out there is for large deployments, I really don't recommend any type of satellite or broadband wireless or wireless internet solution in general. As a matter of fact, to be quite honest with you guys, even though in this office I run a perfectly successful network that has multiple voice over IP phones that I conduct business with people all across the United States without issues, even my voice over IP service provider doesn't recommend my connection. Now, because I'm a broker for all the voice over IP service carriers in the United States, I've got a little pull with them, and they work with me whenever I have had problems with my internet. But for the average Joe Smo, I will be honest with you, most of the providers, if you tell them that you have a satellite internet connection or a broadband wireless connection or wireless connection of any sorts, they will tell you, even though you can use their service, they will not guarantee their service, and they won't even let you out of your contract if you have problems with their service that are caused by your internet connection. So understand that while I'm not telling you it's not possible to have a successfully deployed voice over IP system over satellite or wireless internet, the service providers really don't recommend it. Let's see here. One pointer I want to throw out there, if you haven't gotten voice over IP yet and you've got satellite internet, a surefire way to wonder, can I run voice over IP over my satellite internet? Check things like YouTube and Netflix. Do you experience buffering and delayed streaming with those services? If so, I can promise you'll have issues with voice over IP. If you've got a really good satellite connection and you can stream Netflix and YouTube in HD and you don't really ever experience any services, any streaming issues or buffering issues, you might be able to run voice over IP. The big pointer, like I mentioned before, is just don't get crazy and put like 10 phones on the network. Keep it under 5 phones. If you have a need to go over 5 phones for your home office or business, you really need to look at possibly paying one of the providers to run broadband or fiber into your location. As I already mentioned, as another pointer, check the early cancellation fee with your with mainly your satellite provider if you're signing up for satellite. If you've got satellite and you're thinking about going voice over IP, you need to talk to somebody like me so you can get hooked up specifically with the plan that's on a month to month. That way, if you run into any problems, you're not completely stuck. So anyways, that concludes this video. I just want to say, I hope I didn't discourage anybody watching this video who's thinking about getting voice over IP on satellite from doing it, because it absolutely is doable. But there is a fairly short but important checklist that you need to go through to make sure that you can go through and pretty much ensure whether it's going to be a success or a disaster. In this video, in the description below, I'm going to include a link to a speed test, link that basically will be one of the most reliable speed tests that I have come across, that is the best in testing your satellite or broadband wireless connection to get results, and then you'll know whether you'll have problems with your voice over IP phone service or not. I want to be very clear and just tell you guys, as somebody that works with these companies without mentioning any names, that I have talked to some providers that will say, oh yeah, VOIP will work just fine with our service and this and that. And they're not being totally truthful, because I have seen enough of this to know which carriers are definitely not going to work with voice over IP and which ones will. If you're wondering if yours or the one you are thinking about signing up with will work with VOIP or not, call me. Let's talk. If you've already got them, I can direct you to some speed tests that will give you definitive proof whether you're going to have problems with VOIP or not. Also, before I go, we did another video called the top 3 most reliable internet speed tests online. These are the ones that I have personally used and I've recommended to clients when they think that their internet service provider is not being completely truthful about the speeds that they claim they're delivering. That will show you exactly what speed you've got and exactly what the quality and integrity of your speed is, which is the most important when trying to put voice over IP over a satellite or broadband wireless foundation. So again, Prince Rich with Rich Technology Group, your go-to guy for the best deals on business phone and internet service in the United States. I'll catch you guys again in the next video.